It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here's WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today, well, I'm very excited about who's in the studio with me today. I have Dave Brinker. He's a wildlife ecologist for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. However, in his spare time, this time of year, he's very busy. He is with Project SNOWstorm. You started Project SNOWstorm, Dave?
Along with two other guys, Scott Weidensaw and Steve Huey, we dreamed this thing up in a very quick effort in 2013.
Okay. Now
4 years ago.
I don't know how or why people wouldn't know who Project SNOWstorm is, but there are probably some that don't know what Project SNOWstorm is. Let's tell people first about what a snowy owl is.
Snowy owls are one of the largest owls in the world. They're brilliant white, particularly full adult males. They live in the Arctic, circumpolar, so they're in Europe and Asia, as well as northern Canada, Alaska. And they're charismatic. You've seen them in places like Harry Potter, and when people see a snowy owl, they almost go nuts to go see it.
Exactly right. I call this owl the holy grail of the birding world, and the reason I gave it that term is kind of, imagine, if you will, looking into your backyard in Annapolis or Glen Burnie or Eastern Shore and seeing a polar bear walking by. That's kind of like
That's about like what it is. You know, they share space with the polar bear in the summertime, and when there are good years, they come down here to a place where you'll never see a polar bear. If we see polar bears in Annapolis, we're in trouble.
We're in a lot of trouble. But here's this bird that, for the most part, spends its life, definitely its breeding life, in the Arctic. And up until recently, we might not have realized they were coming down in the record numbers. They are coming down with social media, with sharing photographs on the internet. We now realize that these eruptions, and we'll talk about what an eruption is, are happening.
They happen about every 4 years. The one that occurred 4 years ago in 2013, 2014 was the largest one on record for 50 or 60 years. The hard part about figuring out how large it was compared to history is social media now makes people so much more aware of them, that they show up on lists and people count them, where when you looked at a snowy owl eruption in, say, 1950 or 1960, you exchanged information with postcards and telephone calls.
Right. And, that took time, and not everybody was into the idea. Actually, probably, going back, and I've mentioned this to you prior to this interview, John J. Audubon, the famous ornithologist, naturalist, painter, who wrote his book, Birds of America, between 1827 and 1839. He wrote about these birds. He said that it is fond of the neighborhood of rivers and small streams. That hasn't changed. These owls like the water.
They like water edges, but I don't know that I can fully agree with small streams. Big rivers, sure.
And bays are
just big. Bays, yeah. Ocean coastlines.
Delaware Bay.
The Great Lakes shorelines. The Great Lakes shorelines and the Northeast Atlantic coast are typical hot spots for snowy owls when we have these great eruptions.
Okay, so Audubon says, scarcely is there a winter which does not bring several of these hardy natives of the north to the falls of the Ohio at Louisville. And he also talked about seeing them in Charleston or in South Carolina, which is, that's kind of south.
Those are big eruptions. I wouldn't describe them as typically showing up along the Ohio River anymore.
Right.
They really show up along Great Lakes coastlines most years, especially the upper Great Lakes and Lake Ontario.
So the 13-14 eruption, was that the first year you said to yourself, your group of guys said to yourselves, we got to start doing something with this?
We realized it was going to be a big eruption, and we have a network of owl banders that work on another species that is the smallest in eastern North America, the saw-whet owl. And when we had all these owls coming south, it's like we should take advantage of our network of people interested in owl migration and owl banding and collect as much data on this huge eruption as we can so we can better our conservation for snowy owls, and organize very rapidly to get people out. And it was one of these things where the word spread And people just started stepping up to saying, can I help? And someone heard what we wanted to do. And we had 2 individuals that gave us $20,000 worth of seed money total. And that was what allowed us to put transmitters on the owls. And
all right, let's take a short break and figure out what you've done from there and where you're at now. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Dave Brinker with Project SNOWstorm. They are the one group, probably the only group in existence, that is tracking snowy owls, that are trying to figure out what snowy owls are doing with their lives, where they're breeding, how they're breeding, what happens when they do migrate, where they're migrating to, all of that. Did I miss anything?
Didn't miss anything. We started trying to work on what snowy owls do in the wintertime because nobody has really focused a lot on tracking movements once they're down here in the lower 48, southern Canada. And we now have, because the technology is so good, extremely precise data on how they spend their summer times, because some of them go up to the Arctic, and our little trackers keep on working. And when they come back down to the cell phone network, they give us all the data for the summer.
Your trackers are solar powered, are they not?
They're solar powered, and the best way to think of them is we put a solar panel and a cell phone on the back of a snowy owl.
And so when they are up in the Arctic where there is no sunlight for some of these months, what happens?
Well, it's really the reverse. When they're up in the Arctic breeding,
it's too much sun. You're right.
Sunlight 24 hours a day, the trackers work beautifully.
Okay.
Where they're challenged is when the birds are down here in the wintertime. In December, we have short days, we have low sun angles, and we were living on the edge when we started putting solar-charged tracking units on snowy owls, but they sit out in the sun, even down here, and that's why this has worked. So.
All right, because I've never heard this question addressed, and it's just because it was a question in my mind. 1989, the Nature Conservancy Council and the Royal Society for Protection of Birds commenced a reintroduction of the red kite. During this, they were fitting some of the kites with tail-mounted radio transmitters and harness-mounted radio transmitters. A lot of these birds developed lesions from those transmitters. Is there a concern with putting something on the snowy owls, whether because of reproductive or health reasons?
There's always a concern when you put a transmitter on a bird. Do you have the right way of doing this so you can do it safely?
Okay.
We're following in the footsteps of people who have done this before, that they have documented no adverse impacts of putting these things on. Some of our birds, unfortunately, because they are young birds, meet with bad fates. They get hit by planes, they get electrocuted, and all of the ones that we've gotten back, we sit there and okay, this is a chance to see how good our harness system is, how good our attachment method works. And so far we have not seen any adverse effects.
That's great news.
We've had these birds go up to the Arctic. You can tell when they're breeding, and you can tell by the length of time that they spend in a little tight area, basically whether they were successful or not. Because if they fail, that's a short period. And when it's 2 months long, those birds successfully nested and raised young, and we have no indication that we have any issues with our transmitters while they're basically out in the wild.
Fantastic news. What was the biggest surprise to you in the 4 years that you've now been monitoring them, that you just said to yourself, wow, can't believe that's happening?
I don't know if there's all these great surprises as much as biologists have always sat there and said, well, they go out on the ice and do this, and they do various things, but it was all mostly supposition. Nobody could sit there and drag out a data set and prove that when they come out on the Great Lakes shoreline, they sit on the shoreline till the lakes start to ice up, and then the snowy owls disappear. Well, they're not disappearing. They're going out on the ice, and they sit on ice floes, and then they hunt wintering waterfowl in between until the ice really fully covers the lake. Now, in most of the Great Lakes, that doesn't happen. Places like Lake Erie will freeze over. When that happens, then the owls disperse back to the mainland. And so we've been able to document that and show the value of coastlines to them, how they move and where they go in the wintertime, how they use habitats like downtown New York. We had one of our birds go right through downtown New York, sat on top of the building, and then kept on going.
These are birds because they are from the Arctic. They're not used to people. They're not used to automobiles. They're not used to any of the stuff we have in modern day society, right?
Eruptions like this are usually young birds. They're naive, and so when they get down here, what they're finding is all these new things. They have to learn about the environment of people and all the challenges that we put in front of them.
And to the bird that was in New York, it successfully navigated New York and went back up north where it was supposed to during the summer?
That was Baltimore. That is
Baltimore. Yes, our bird.
One of our favorite birds, because it came down here and it was first trapped and moved away from an airport. We didn't put a transmitter on it because it was the end of the season, and it was getting to the point where we had he was a male, we had plenty of males marked. So we removed him from the airport, transported him west to Frederick, let him go. He came back and got trapped at the same airport the next winter. At that point, because he was a year and a half old, he's made it through the mortality squeeze that all young birds have, learning about things like airports and trains and cars and that. We said, you're getting a transmitter. Mm-hmm. He went back to the Arctic, came back to us wintered on Amherst Island the next winter. We got all his Arctic data from his transmitter. He went back to the Arctic again, came back down to the Ottawa River Valley and started delivering data. And he was just wonderful. And that's the kind of thing where we're getting great examples of what they do.
He's just a wealth of information.
He is, yeah.
And why are they erupting? Do we have a definitive reason for that yet?
The old sort of wives' tale, if you want to let me use that term, was that they were always starving. And we've learned by looking at these that really it's a reproductive output, because snowy owls feed on lemmings to raise their young. And lemmings go through these great cycles where they will be boom and bust. You'll have large numbers of lemmings, and then the next year they're all gone. Snowy owls have a way of finding these great abundances. They raise large clutches, and when they find a really big one, all the owls will raise 8, 9, 10 chicks to fledging, and then you have all these young owls that have to figure out how to survive for the next 3 years till they're old enough to breed. And their way of doing it is coming south to places like the Northeast.
So it's a rite of passage.
It's a rite of passage.
It's like kicking our kids out to go to college.
That's one way of putting it, yep.
All right, we're going to take another short break. When we come back, more about snowy owls and what we can all do to keep them safe. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me is Dave Brinker with Project SNOWstorm. They're trying to figure out what the snowy owls are all about that we have visiting throughout our state right now and all up along the Northeast through the Midwest. They're in the midst of an eruption. Eruption is not spelled the same way as a volcano erupts. It's IRR. Dave is also a wildlife ecologist for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. These birds are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. They cannot be shot.
That's right. I mean, all wild birds, with the exception of a few things like sparrows and starlings and pigeons, are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty. And snowy owls, being fairly charismatic, attracting a lot of attention from bird watchers and even people who wouldn't call themselves a bird watcher, but they hear in the local paper and they want to go see this big white owl that really captivates people. One of the things we can do for them is be careful how we observe them. You know, they're owls. They're active at night, despite the fact that some people might occasionally see them foraging during the daytime. They're really resting in the daytime. They're trying to sleep. They're trying to, recover, because their advantage for feeding is at night. And when people press them too much to get the best picture or to get closer or to have, the snowy owl in the background over your young child's shoulder and, you're
taken with a cell phone, right?
Yeah, things like that. And you cause them to fly. You're causing them to use energy that they normally wouldn't be using. So the best thing is to just behave carefully. If the owl starts to look alert and nervous, don't go any closer,
And don't try to take a cell phone photo unless the owl has landed next to you. Don't go landing next to the owl.
And don't feed them. There are photographers and people who will go out and actively feed them thinking they're starving, and in most cases they're not. And what you're doing is you're teaching them bad habits, and there are websites out there where you can go see, what's their proper etiquette for observing a snowy owl and how should people behave around these beautiful creatures that don't know what we are and what kind of hazards we propose to them.
Websites such as yours, what's the address?
Project Snowstorm is www.projectsnowstorm.org. One word in Project Snowstorm.
How many owls have you fitted this eruption so far with transmitters?
So far we put 7 transmitters out on snowy owls. 1 in North Dakota, 2 in New York, 1 in Maine, 3 in New Jersey.
Nice. What else can we do to keep these owls healthy? How do we ensure they have a future?
One of the things with snowy owls, like polar bears, because we mentioned those before, is they're a creature of the Arctic, and the Arctic systems are changing now. And that change is because our climate is not stable. There's never anything stable in life or even weather or the world, as much as we'd like it to be that way. The things we can do, people often say, what can I do for snowy owls? Well, you observe them carefully and you think about your lifestyle. How much do we use our car? Do we have a car that's green? Do we have a car that pollutes? Do we leave the lights on and things like that? Global warming is something that science is convinced is real. We all accept it as real. And if you want to do something good for snowy owl conservation, figure out what you can do in your life to lessen your impact on the carbon cycle.
And this I see a lot at schools, when you're picking up kids, turn the car off and wait. You will not freeze to death in 5 minutes, more than likely, in Maryland.
Any kind of thing you certainly won't freeze to death in Maryland in 5 minutes.
So turn the car off instead of letting it run while you're waiting. It makes a big difference if we all do these little things. Again, on the website, Dave?
Project Snowstorm's website is www.projectsnowstorm.org.
And you need help from the public to keep doing what you do.
This is a crowd-funded project, and that is successful because snowy owls are so charismatic. And whenever people want to think about something to do, the time of giving, we do have a way of accepting donations, and all that goes into transmitters. Nobody makes money on this. We are volunteers.
And you also do you have a Facebook page or?
We have a Facebook presence. I'm not a big
social media. Okay.
That's one of the wonderful things about Project Snowstorm is it has attracted all kinds of talents. We have people who deal with our social media. We have a wonderful web guy, Drew Weber, who does all that work. And if it wasn't for all these people contributing talents, it would not be anywhere near as successful as it is.
There's been a debate that sprang up with this eruption. At least one of the bird Facebook groups has said no snowy owl photos. There's some others that are mandating that you need to put the type of lens used and the distance the photograph was shot from. What's your feeling? Should we be sharing locations of snowy owls? My feeling is it's a huge teachable moment, and I would hate to see a future conservationist, a future birder, not have the ability to see a snowy owl.
We think people should be able to see snowy owls.
Okay.
The trick is do it responsibly. There's no reason why you shouldn't take photos, but again, do it responsibly. Don't feed the owl so it comes closer. Don't creep so close to get the frame-filling perfect image because you don't have a long lens, and then flush the snowy owl. There's various places where you can find out proper etiquette for how to do that.
Again, and that's there is mention of this on Project SNOWstorm's website. I saw it myself.
Yep.
Snowy owls seem to like big, vast, open spaces, similar to probably the Arctic or airports, which is a safety concern for both humans and owls. At some airports, unfortunately, owls have had to be killed. In recent history, there was one which Project SNOWstorm was able to relocate.
We went to Pax River.
I saw that, actually,
and
yeah.
removed one from Pax River and took it out to Frederick and let it go out.
That's awesome, because it's, so concerning with them being on the airfield to people and the bird.
It's amazing how tolerant they are of noise. The new vertical takeoff and landing jet was doing some practice maneuvers right by the runway, the bird sitting there. I mean, that jet is loud. That bird didn't budge, didn't move at all.
He's young, right?
He was young, was a young male.
Yeah.
He was low weight. Once we captured him, we held him for 2 days while we fed him back up, and then we released him 200 grams heavier than he was.
That's awesome.
The Pax River thing was fun. Kyle Rambo called and said, we want to move this because if we can't, we have to do something that nobody wants to do, and we managed to trap him and get him out of there.
That's great. Dave, thank you very much for doing what you do and for joining me today.
It's one of the things that makes life exciting, and thank you for spreading the word about Project SNOWstorm.
This is Donna Cole with the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.